I'm Guadalupe Valdés, and I'm a professor at Stanford University. And for many years, I had a joint appointment in the Spanish department and in the School of Education. After about 2008, I left the Spanish department, and I'm exclusively in the School of Education. Well, I began working on the question of heritage language learners about the mid-70s. And I was very interested at the time because what had happened is that there was open enrollment in American universities. And when there was open enrollment, a number of students came into language departments that typically had language requirements. And so you could not graduate from a university unless you had taken these many years of foreign language in college. So that meant when more Latino students started coming into departments of Spanish, there was no preparation to teach them for their particular needs. Right? And so the assumption was made that the particular standards and ways of thinking about how language developed that were appropriate for foreign language learners could be applied to heritage language learners as well. So the term didn't exist, heritage language learners. So I usually speak about, even though they're very established now in Spanish departments, I would basically continue to say that they're a stepchild of Spanish departments, right? They are not really the mainstream program. They still are something that is quite not quite as legitimate as the foreign language learners that are the real learners, right? Most Spanish departments have there are departments of literature. And so the first 2 years are exclusively to give students enough language so that they can do the literature, right? So, and I would argue that we have the same situation continuing with very little change. So when you think about assessment under those conditions, right? So the real question is, what do you want to assess, right? So you could assess for placement if you had several different levels, right? But that's assuming that you knew what you wanted them to get to. So you'd have to know what you were teaching, what the outcomes would be after year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, right? Without knowing that, you can't place anyone. So those are the difficulties that come up. Or if you wanted program evaluation, you'd also have to have a fairly good idea of what you wanted that to accomplish. And for that, you'd have to have some theoretical understanding of what you thought you might develop in terms of a heritage learner that were similar to or different from the traditional foreign language students. I think that the literature on bilingualism, we have studied them incredibly. We know a lot about how bilingualism works and doesn't work. Right? We understand how bilinguals are not monolinguals. Right? We know that very well. It is the expectations of language departments, right, that is the problem. Right?
Okay.
Because if you think that a bilingual is going to become 2 monolinguals in one, that is the problem. And you want to measure that, right? So you want to compare bilinguals with monolinguals, okay? And assuming that any contrast or any difference between the bilinguals and the monolingual original native speakers is a problem, then you're evaluating them according to that, right? So I don't think our problem is that we don't have the research. We have the research. What we have is an ideology, okay? Right.
Okay.
That is the problem. You have to say what the purpose is, right?
Right.
That is fundamental. If you want to know, do you know enough Chinese to do what? Right?
Exactly.
And so once you have a purpose, you can assess it with, again, and that's what I'm saying. Programs typically don't do that, right? So if you say, I have a program to prepare heritage language speakers to become teachers of the language, then I know what I want to assess.
Okay.
If you say, I want to prepare heritage speakers of language so they can be museum guides in this country using whatever language it is, I know exactly what I want to assess. It's not knowing where I'm going that is the problem. Right? So this general proficiency thing, right? What is general proficiency? Well, those are not very good tests. Those are not very good assessments, right? Now, if you're asking me the question, and I've asked this question, and I actually have developed an assessment for this, okay? What kind of Spanish would teachers need to do to become bilingual teachers? That's a perfectly possible way of assessing teachers, right? Now I know what I want them to be able to do. They should be able to deliver instruction, okay, in oral Spanish, and I can develop a test to do that. They should be able to talk to parents. They should be able to understand child language spoken rapidly. Do you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
Right? So the assessments are going to be designed to measure what I want to know about the development of language. The reason that they're developed in terms of placement is because you have an academic program, and academic programs necessitates categorizing students. Right?
Okay.
So you have to categorize students so you know whether they belong in the first year or in the second year, right? So suppose I want to find out whether or not you could read literature, right? It's easy enough to select different pieces at different levels to see whether you can do that. But the placement goes, it does have a purpose. I want to place you in a program that I know in semester 1 I do this, in semester 2 I do that. Okay. So suppose the purpose of my heritage program was to teach the standard language. Suppose I thought that the purpose of a program were to teach the standard language, then and I began by teaching these particular correcting these kinds of errors. Okay. In semester 1 and semester 2, I can develop a test to do that.
Okay. Okay. So it's mostly about the purpose, right?
It's mostly always about the purpose. Well, what do you want the heritage program to do?
Okay.
Which presupposes an ideology about these students coming in. What do I think they need? Right?
Okay.
Now, suppose, and this is my own personal view, that I want heritage language programs to maintain the language for another generation. Right?
Okay.
And if that's my purpose, right, then my design of the program is going to be such, right, that my research would be, all right, what provokes someone to feel confident enough in the language to continue to use it? What set of experiences would persuade them that this is of such value that they're going to select a mate, so that they can continue the language for another generation, right?
Okay.
So the purpose of what you think the program is for will then push you to ask questions about what do I need to do to get them there.
Okay.
Now, if your theory, however, is that these individuals are incomplete monolinguals and there's incomplete acquisition, right, then that's what you're going to do research on, what is incompletely acquired, and then you believe that direct teaching is going to lead to acquisition, and probably you're going to teach that.
Okay. I see. Okay.
But you see how far apart those two positions are. Again, it depends, right?
Okay.
Say, for example, they're always evaluated indirectly if you have a department of languages, right, where the students will have to leave an elementary program and then enroll in higher level courses. There's always an indirect evaluation as how well the students do, right? Because there's always that assumption that if you're going to come to my advanced grammar class, you're prepared for my advanced grammar class. Okay, so there's always that evaluation going on. I may not actually have an assessment that measures to see whether or not you're doing that, but indirectly there's always been assessment to the degree that there's articulation between the levels of a program. But I think that the different departments, depending on the need for their doing so, right, might want to develop those assessments formally, right?
Right.
But we now go back to, we have to be very precise, on what we think we want these different levels to do, or you need a theory of heritage language development in an instructed setting after that language has been to some degree acquired, if that's your point of view.
Okay.
Do you see what I'm saying? Right?
Yeah.
You're going to need a theory either way, right? But in other cases, if you don't want a theory, then you're just going to say, well, Professor Y expects them to be able to understand or to be able to read Chinese literature in the original. Then it's very clear what we are going to assess, right?
Okay.
I think there has been a lot of development of curriculum.
Okay.
I think that what there has been a problem in is what is the philosophical or ideological position about what this instruction should get you to. Right? So is it heritage? Is it recovering a heritage for personal reasons? Okay. Is it recovering a heritage for functioning? So there's been a confusion both in the student as well as in the programs, right? So if I'm a speaker of Korean and I decide I'm going to, and I heard it at home, but I feel that I can't speak it, why do I enroll in a class? Because there's certainly a personal connection with that language, right? And so I want to do something with that language, but in fact, sometimes that Korean speaker could have zero Korean, right? In which case, by my definition, there really aren't a heritage student that would profit from instruction different from a foreign language learner. Right? The personal heritage is there, but the linguistic acquisition is not in place at any level, right? So there's been that confusion, right, about what does heritage mean. And so So that's where I think is the confusion. Right?
Okay.
So that's why I keep saying I think heritage programs are still stepchildren. There's a great deal of confusion about it, but if mainstream, well, there are people who really don't care about non-English languages anyway, right? But let's assume that you're part of one of the language teaching departments, and you happen to be those who are the faculty who teach the literature, right? So I would define that as the mainstream perspective, say in Spanish departments, right? So what is their view of heritage programs? Is probably that they're a necessary irritant.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
We need to have them in the department, but they're not the real students, the students we're used to, the students that we've been teaching for years, the students whose development we can predict, right? Because we really can predict, if a student who starts the language at 0 in freshman year at a university, you pretty much can predict exactly what that development is going to be like. We have a lot of information, right? A student who comes, or these 17 students who come with very different kinds of backgrounds, you can't predict that, right? Why? Because the nature of language is that way, right? The nature of experience. Language isn't acquired in a classroom, it's lived, right?
Yes.
So depending on how you live the language, you're going to be different, right? So the mainstream perception is there's just so much we don't know, okay? And the tools that we have from doing research on foreign language learning really don't serve us well, okay? For looking at heritage language learners, we really need the tools coming out of sociolinguistics, okay?
Right.
That's the problem.